What you're about to see are the findings from the 2025 BC Paramedic Health and Wellness Survey. Before we dive in, here's a quick look at the journey ahead. We'll begin with a brief disclaimer and purpose, then explore the early years of a paramedic's career and the unique vulnerabilities many bring into the profession. From there, we'll examine the daily toll of the job and the very real human cost to mental health and well-being. We'll then shift toward pathways to wellness, rethinking what success truly means in this profession, and finally, focus on how we can move forward together with meaningful, actionable support. This content is provided for informational purposes only and reflects anonymous survey responses and personal experiences shared by participants. It does not identify, name, or make allegations against any organization, employer, department, or individual, and should not be interpreted as a statement of fact, a finding of wrongdoing, or an assessment of liability. Experiences shared reflect personal perceptions and lived experiences and do not represent verified clinical, legal, or organizational conclusions. Survey findings are presented in aggregate form and are not intended to evaluate or characterize any specific workplace or employment environment. This material is intended to support awareness and dialogue, not to assign fault or liability. This was all put together to really listen to what paramedics have going through and to find meaningful ways to strengthen support for them, not just on the job, but as whole people. You know what makes the survey so different is that it was developed by volunteers, a mix of mental health professionals and paramedics with years of on-the-job experience. That blend of clinical knowledge and real-world perspective was absolutely crucial. The goal was to get a truly honest look at the support systems in place and to pinpoint exactly where things need to change. So, before we really dive in, we have to talk about the context here. It is so important to remember that these findings are framed by some immense challenges that paramedics have been facing. The opioid crisis, the heat dome, the COVID-19 pandemic, staffing shortages, and constantly rising call volumes. All right, a quick but important note before we continue. This explainer contains discussions of trauma, mental health, and suicide. Please feel free to pause or stop if you need to. And, we're just going to pause on this slide for a moment. Some of the topics we're getting into can be pretty heavy. If you or anyone you know needs support, these resources are here for you right now. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out. So, where does the journey for a paramedic really begin? Let's start right at the beginning and explore the realities and vulnerabilities they face in those first few years on the job. The survey found that more than a third of paramedics, we're talking 37%, started their careers before they even turned 25. And that brings us to a really telling statistic. A staggering 79% of paramedics believe there should be a minimum age to get into this profession. Now, that's not just a number, it's a powerful statement about the kind of emotional maturity and life experience they feel is necessary to handle the trauma of this job day in and day out. The survey also looked at some of the vulnerabilities people might be bringing with them into the job. It looked at something called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. These are stressful or traumatic events that happened before the age of 18. And what they found was that over half of the paramedics surveyed reported moderate to high ACE scores. Now, here's a number that might surprise you. 21% of respondents were already dealing with a diagnosed mental health condition before they ever started their careers as paramedics. So, when paramedics were asked what would have helped them back then, 60% said that starting their career alongside an experienced urban paramedic would have made a huge difference for their well-being. And an overwhelming 83% said they would have valued being assigned a mental health professional right at the very start of their career. What happens when those early vulnerabilities meet the daily grind of the job? Well, our next section dives into the immense workload, the constant pressure, and that crucial but often overlooked need for recovery. Let's talk about overtime. On average, paramedics are working between 3.5 to 4 hours of overtime in addition to their regular scheduled shift every week. Nearly 1 in 5 are working 9 or more extra hours, and on top of all that, more than a third of them are picking up 1 to 3 extra shifts each week. And when it comes to recovery, 68% of paramedics, more than two-thirds, did not feel fully rested after their days off. Only 32% of them are going back to work fully recovered. The survey really zeroed in on a couple of major stressors in the day-to-day. 70% of paramedics reported that not getting adequate breaks increases their stress. And for those working in rural and remote areas, over half said that a lack of local services adds to their stress during calls. The survey also asked paramedics whether they had ever worked a shift while feeling mentally unwell. An overwhelming 85% answered yes. The question is, why? Well, the reasons are really complex. They're layered. You see this mix of financial pressure, fear of losing wages, but also this incredible sense of duty to their team. And then there's the fear of judgment. All of this points to a bigger cultural issue where mental health just isn't always seen as a legitimate reason to take time off. So, what is the cumulative impact of all of these pressures? Our next section looks at the very real, very human cost to a paramedic's health and their well-being. So, how do paramedics feel about their own mental health right now? Well, when they were asked to rate it, 57% described it as either poor or fair. So, how are they coping with all this pressure? Well, the survey shows that two-thirds of them use sleep aids just to get some rest. Over half use substances like nicotine, alcohol, prescription, or recreational drugs to cope, and nearly half of them reported that they just don't have enough healthy coping tools to manage all the stress from work. A lot of us have heard of PTSD, but in emergency services, the trauma often isn't from just a single event. This brings us to CPTSD, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That term acknowledges the reality of repeated, prolonged exposure to traumatic events. Unlike a single incident trauma, CPTSD develops over time and can deeply affect a person's ability to regulate their emotions, maintain their sense of self-worth, and feel safe in the world. Which, let's be honest, dealing with these constant, compounding stressors is a fundamental part of the job. More recently, however, you will hear this increasingly referred to as CPTSI, which stands for Complex Post-Traumatic Stress Injury. This updated terminology is being used much more now because there is a greater awareness of how stigma affects first responders. Reframing this as an injury rather than a disorder makes a vital distinction. It is not a fundamental flaw or a mental weakness. It is a very real occupational wound caused by external forces. Just like a physical injury sustained on the job, a psychological injury is something that can be treated, managed, and healed. This shift in language helps remove the shame and encourages more paramedics to reach out for the support they deserve. With that in mind, take a look at these self-reported symptoms. Between 56 and 68% of paramedics report experiencing intrusive memories, difficulty concentrating, emotional detachment, and hypervigilance. Many say they have lost interest in things they once enjoyed, feel more irritable or angry, and experience flashbacks from previous emergency calls. So, is it any surprise that two-thirds of them have thought about just leaving the profession altogether? But here's the thing, they feel stuck. Either they can't afford to, or they just have no idea what else they would do. So they're literally trapped in a career that's actively hurting them. The survey also asked one of the most difficult questions you can ask. During their career, how many paramedics have experienced suicidal thoughts? 47%, almost half. And of those who have had suicidal thoughts, 20% have gone on to make a plan, and 7% have attempted suicide. This work often leaves a lasting mark. The calls, the stress, and the losses paramedics experience can remain with them long after their final shift. To better understand that impact, it is important to also hear from those who have already retired from the profession. Retirement for paramedics seems to be the story of two conflicting realities. On one hand, you have over half reporting their well-being has actually improved. But on the other side, 42% are still dealing with unresolved trauma. And for a third of them, it's significantly affecting their daily life. The big takeaway here, leaving the job doesn't mean you leave the trauma behind. So what helps? Well, retirees say they value staying connected. They want to use their incredible experience to mentor others or volunteer, and it really highlights this simple, powerful human need to feel valued and to be able to access the support systems they had during their careers. Let's continue to look at the paths forward and turn to the solutions by focusing on the supports that paramedics themselves are saying are vital for their wellness. The survey showed a more nuanced view on a brief pre-shift mental health self-check. While only about 19% were sure it would be helpful, a full 50%, half of all respondents, said it was possibly helpful. Paramedics are being incredibly clear about what they need. There is a definite call for proactive care. 77% of them support the idea of mandatory, paid-for mental health check-ins at least once or twice a year. And the support for building wellness right into the job's framework is huge. I mean, look at this chart. That tall bar, that's the 85% of respondents who believe required continuing education should include topics like mental health and trauma literacy. And yeah, that's the exact same percentage who said they've worked while unwell. That's no coincidence. When asked what they need most, a few key things came up again and again. Immediate time off after a traumatic event, immediate unlimited counseling, and structured follow-up. Specialized treatments like EMDR therapy, that stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, have also been identified as particularly effective for treating trauma. Beyond clinical support, many paramedics also highlighted the need for more sustainable shift patterns, especially schedules that better support families with younger children. Having more predictable and family-friendly schedules can make a meaningful difference in maintaining balance between work and home life. They also asked for programs that support and educate paramedic families, along with opportunities for mentorship and coaching to help members navigate the unique challenges of the profession. And this next finding, it points to a real openness for new ways of healing. Over half of the paramedics surveyed said they're interested in exploring plant-based or alternative medicines, things like psilocybin, MDMA, or ketamine, but only if they're offered in a safe, regulated, and professionally guided setting. These therapies have been shown to help support mental health and wellness. Let's look further into some on-the-job support, reducing the time spent unseen after a particularly tough call. 67% of participants said their health was negatively impacted when they did not learn the patient outcome after a traumatic call. Knowing the outcome helps provide closure and reduce mental distress. On the other hand, additional training would support them to better navigate trauma, and paramedics want to be proactive with early recognition, intervention, and preventative care for themselves, in addition to specialized communication training. Lastly, opening up access to things like animal-assisted therapies would reduce their stress after tough calls. There's also really strong support for bringing in more mind-body programs. These are techniques designed to help manage the physical effects of stress and trauma. We're talking about meditation, breath work, and different therapies that really focus on that powerful mind-body connection. This brings us to our final section. How can we help? This survey made one thing very clear. BC paramedics are deeply committed to the communities they serve, but many are carrying an invisible, cumulative weight of stress and trauma. The encouraging part is that by acknowledging this, we now have the opportunity to take proactive steps toward improving long-term well-being within the profession and in the day-to-day lives of paramedics. If this conversation matters to you, the first step is simple. Join the private Telegram group below to stay connected and be part of the ongoing discussion. You can also help by liking this post, sharing this video across your social media platforms, starting conversations about this topic within your networks, and actively engaging in respectful, solution-focused dialogue. Awareness starts the conversation, and communities turn it into action. That leads to the bigger question. What exactly are we building toward? There are programs currently being used with veterans and first responders that are reporting promising results in the areas of PTSD, trauma, and anxiety. Blending practical neuroscience and quantum physics with meditation-based tools, these initiatives are designed to help participants shift out of chronic survival mode, better understand their stress responses, and build more sustainable patterns that support long-term well-being. Some of the most encouraging outcomes have been seen in individuals who had struggled for years, explored multiple avenues without lasting change, and felt they had run out of options. So, what would the next step look like here in British Columbia? The intention would be to privately sponsor a small group of BC paramedics to participate in a pilot initiative, allowing us to gather feedback, evaluate outcomes, and determine responsible next steps based on real data from our own community. As mentioned earlier, the Telegram group has already been introduced and is where this next phase is unfolding. Within the group, there are two channels. The first is a paramedic-only channel. This space is specifically for paramedics and includes an anonymous poll where paramedics can indicate whether they would be willing to volunteer to participate if a pilot program were fully supported. The second channel is called Paramedic Community Support. This space is open to both paramedics and members of the public. It is a place for conversation, updates, and for those who want to stay informed or potentially support future fundraising efforts. Please join us in being part of a growing community working toward a healthier future for paramedics. And real change doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people step forward and support one another. As Dr. Joe Dispenza often says, people change people. The systems and policies matter, of course they do, but at the very heart of healing and support is just human connection. If we want stronger emergency care, we need stronger support for the people providing it. And perhaps the most important step forward is simply recognizing that the people who spend their lives caring for others deserve care too. Thank you to everyone who contributed their time, insight, and support to make this survey and video possible. This project was built through the voices and efforts of many people who cared deeply about the well-being of our paramedic community. Thank you to every single paramedic who took the time to participate in the survey and share their voice with such honesty and courage. This work is dedicated to all paramedics, first responders, and emergency frontline professionals who have lost their lives to mental health struggles and suicide. In loving memory of our colleague and friend, Toby Ellis. We honor the families, friends, and coworkers who continue to carry their memory, their love, and their loss. May this work serve as a promise to foster meaningful change, compassion, and support for all who serve.